Perhaps you know the comedian Jim Gaffigan. One topic for his stand-up is parenting, and he speaks from his own experience of being a dad. Now, every exhausted parent, of young ones, which is almost redundant, every exhausted parent probably appreciates this thought of his. There should be a children's song. If you're happy and you know it, keep it to yourself and let your dad sleep. Jim Gaffigan makes me laugh, but I quote Jim Gaffigan today to introduce a serious point. He once asked his audience the rhetorical question, "You ever read a book that changed your life?" He answered the question for himself this way, "Me neither." But there is a point to that. What does help us change something about ourselves? Certainly, sometimes more information is helpful, right? And, sometimes reading a book, learning more, it doesn't work. Instead of trying to think differently, sometimes we just got to do something. And that is what changes something inside of us. Jesus gets that. Now, really, more than anyone else ever, I think, Jesus does invite us to a new way of thinking and seeing the world. He had this amazing vision for how the world could be and how the world should be. A vision where every person knew they mattered. And we knew that we were in it together. And we took care of each other, especially those vulnerable, right? But Jesus also knows that sometimes we just can't think ourselves into a new reality. Sometimes we have to act. And that's what changes how we see the world or how we see ourselves or how we see life. For example, Jesus says, if we find ourselves angry at someone we know, pray for them. Do something good for those who hurt you. It's an action. He says, if you want to be close to me, visit me in prison, or welcome me when I'm a stranger, or feed me when I'm hungry. And today, Jesus talks about a great treasure we can find, which no one and no thing can take from us. And to help us get there, he says, sell your possessions and give to the poor. He understands that there's a certain freedom we can only find by the action of giving some of our stuff away. Now, I first saw that principle in action when I was still in the seminary. Now, I might have been my deacon year, finishing up my graduate schooling. I had heard of this priest in Illinois named Father Dean Braun. That was evidently a great spiritual advisor. I thought, you know what? I'll go check him out. I don't know. However this evolved, there I am visiting him in his office. The first thing I noticed was how barren it was. There's hardly anything. Well, I found out that he gives stuff away. And at the end of our chat, he looked around and he goes, I wish I had something to give you. And he sees a handmade paperweight. He goes, here, would you take this? Now, we Kempf kids didn't have much money to begin with. But I noticed how free he was and the joy he had. And I decided, you know what? I would follow his example. And what I found was that when I would give stuff away, I felt more free of stuff, if that makes sense. Possessions became less important to me. It wasn't thinking that changed me. It was doing. And sometimes that's what will work for each of us. So, examples? Recently, someone told me about going to couples therapy to strengthen their relationship. Great thing to do. He said, our therapist suggested that we hold hands when we would go for a walk to strengthen our connection. He said, I objected. He said, I wanted to want to hold her hand before I would take it. But the therapist said, no, do it, and it will change you. He said, I didn't believe it, but when we walked, I started to hold her hand, and it worked. Or, I have a friend, young woman. I don't know what triggered this in her, but she did not want to become vain or worried about that. So for 2 weeks, this young woman didn't wear makeup to school, to work, anywhere. Or, Abraham and Sarah, in today's first reading, they found it impossible to believe that what God was asking of them and promising to them would be true. But they just did it. In their old age, they set out. How about you? How might you act yourself into a new way of thinking and being? Would you like to be less afraid of being laughed at? Well, personally, you wouldn't think this maybe if you only knew me at this stage of my life, but I was always self-conscious and shy and felt inferior. But perhaps partly as a survival tactic in my own home, and you might try this, I learned to make fun of myself first before anybody else did, to laugh at myself in public. Do you wish you had less anger at someone you know? Well, what if you smiled at them, said something nice to them, did something nice for them? Watch if something changes. Would you like to be less afraid of the world falling apart? Do something that nurtures your spirit and then go help someone. Are you discomforted by being around old people? Go to a nursing home. Spend some time there. Heck, just come to the rectory. If you think that your presence doesn't matter to others, or you don't belong or fit in, you know what you do? Go to that event, open the door, step in, just smile. Sometimes it is the doing of that starts to change our thinking and how we are. We can change sometimes just by doing something. You know, Jim Gaffigan once commented on the Adam and Eve story in the garden and how they were told not to eat of the apple. Now, he likes to make fun of his own weight, so he said, an apple? I mean, imagine it in his voice if you know him. Have you ever been tempted by an apple? I would have been like, cover it in caramel, then get back to me. Hey, you got any cake back there? So maybe he's not our scripture scholar. But when it comes to whether or not we are changed by reading books or maybe thinking, he has a point. I mean, it has its place, but sometimes we change most just by doing something. I think Jesus would agree.